Good afternoon. Today on our program, the presidential elections 2024 with Daily Mirror, we have invited Samagi Jana Balawegaya parliamentarian Eran Wickramaratne to the program. Welcome to the program, Mr. Wickramaratne.
Thank you.
Now, Mr. Wickramaratne, as we say, the campaign is in full swing, and candidates are going all around the country, and your candidate is also going all around the country. And this entire election campaign theme is based on rebuilding the economy, addressing corruption and frauds. So your leader has talked about giving a kind of an human face to this program with the International Monetary Fund. We are halfway through that program. Actually, what do you exactly mean by giving a human face to the program?
Thank you for inviting me to be here. I think you asked a very important question. The question is, Sri Lanka is a country in a huge economic crisis. Sometimes the word bankrupt has been actually used. And we obviously have got into this situation because of the mismanagement of the economy. When an economy is mismanaged, only you go to the IMF. This is the 17th time that Sri Lanka has actually gone to the IMF. Really, it's something that we should be really ashamed of ourselves. 75 years, every budget has been imbalanced, always had a budget deficit. Only 5 times that we have had the opportunity of actually having a primary surplus in the budget. Only 5 times. And that was, I think, if I remember, 1954-55, there was a primary surplus. By 56, the government that created the primary surplus and the discipline went out of office. Again in 2017 and 2018, we had the same issue. We actually created a primary surplus. Primary surplus means the revenue is higher than the expenditure, leaving financial costs out. But in 2019, that government also went out of office. So we go to the IMF, it's because of a crisis. It's a little bit like, if you want to take your company public and go to the market, you have to go to an auditor and get the audit statements and create an acceptance. Going to the IMF, apart from the details of the program, creates an acceptance in the market. So it's absolutely essential to have the IMF program. And I think there is no debate about that. Where we differ is on some of the details. And that is, I think, where your question is very relevant. So the IMF focuses on macroeconomic stability. And then we agree on certain measures and percentages. Now, what really surprised me of the present IMF program is, because I was involved very closely in the 2015-2019 program as State Minister of Finance, that was a fiscal consolidation based on revenue. I was surprised that this program only did the same thing. They didn't really pay attention to cost. It should have been a fiscal consolidation based on revenue and cost, eliminating wastage and corruption and all. It should have been based on that. But unfortunately, it was not actually based on that. So that really was a surprise, but that's where actually we are. Now, while some boxes of the IMF program can be ticked and the government is going out of its way to say, my heavens, we've created so much stability, macroeconomic stability, they've forgotten one important thing. The important thing that they have forgotten is you can't resurrect an economy only on macroeconomic stability. You need to have social stability. Really, the issue that we are facing is there's social instability. And I'm very, very concerned about that, because while we are ticked the boxes, what we are not really saying is that those below the poverty line were 3 million. And now that number has gone from 3 million to 7 million above the poverty line. So 7 million is like 1/3 of the Sri Lankan population gone below the poverty line. So it's creating social instability, right? And that is why we are using the phrase, we are saying we definitely will stay within the broad framework of the IMF program, the agreement, but we have to really renegotiate and talk about the details, because if you create social instability and it spills on, the cost of that will be much greater than the benefits that we have got out of the IMF program.
Yes. Actually, how are you going to adjust the parameters of the current program to ensure more benefits to the marginalized communities or the people who live below the poverty line, as you mentioned? So currently also there is a program going on, and your leader is mentioning some programs. How can you achieve those targets without compromising your revenue targets?
You definitely have to do that. Really, there is no choice. You absolutely have to do that. There is absolutely no choice. Because what's the point in basically agreeing on some piece of paper when actually everything spills over? We can't get there. So if you look at the people at the bottom of the pyramid, they need to be absolutely supported. Particularly the poor income holders. There are sections of society which need to be protected, right? You have on one side, you have pregnant mothers, you have children, right? They are our priority because malnourishment is a problem. And then children, particularly between the age of 1 and 5, their mental development, they say, experts say, is about 70% within that period. So they need to be basically protected. On the other hand, we have senior citizens because today people don't live till they're 50 or 60, they live till they're 80, 90 and 100. And therefore, they work for 30 years and then they have a retirement life of 30 or 40 years as well. And they need to be protected. So social protection is absolutely important. And then, apart from taking care of them, then you have the group in the middle. Now, the group in the middle, quite a considerable number of them actually go to work every single day. Right, and what has happened to them is, right, their income levels in the last 2-3 years have remained almost flat, but the costs have gone up because of the mismanagement of the economy. Inflation went through the roof. Official figures were like 70%, food inflation like 100%, but actually when I said this somewhere, mother came up to me and said, I don't think you go shopping. I said, why? You said it went up only 100%. But actually, she said some foods have gone up 200 and 300%, 2-3 times. So food inflation. So the average family, right? They have, let's say, 2 kids. They have to educate their kids. They have to provide the food. They may be taking care of their parents and grandparents, and they go to work. They have to take care of the transport as well. If they don't have a house, they have to pay the rent. Now the tax-free slab, for example, is only 100,000 rupees. So 100,000 rupees and suddenly the cost have gone up. Huge problem, and they are really, really squeezed. So some of them have really gone through all their savings and some have got into debt. Now these people who go to work every day, right, they get on a bus, they get on a train, right, or they get into a van and they actually go to work. They work a full day and they go home. They live with honor and with dignity. They take care of the children, their families, their parents, their grandparents. They take care. They have also got press. So this is not only the poor, the people who are in the middle have also got press. So one thing we will do is we'll give some relief there as well. It's presently 100,000 rupees, it's a tax-free slab. We are going to move that up to 150,000 rupees and we will be charging them a nominal 500 rupees of tax. And that's needed apart from revenue, that's needed for another reason. We want to make sure that everybody is in the tax net, so that also we want to make sure.
So actually, how are you going to achieve the revenue targets? Because there can't be any compromise on revenue targets. Because for you to do anything, be it welfare, development or whatever, you need revenue in the first hand. But at the same time, you have to ensure welfare benefits for the marginalized communities. Then actually, how do you achieve that without compromising those revenue targets? If you spend from one end, then you have to cut it from another.
Yeah. I think it's a very, very valid question because when you look at your, P&L, if I can use that revenue and expenditure sheet, if you are basically easing the pressure at one end, right, and then you are losing revenue, then you have to collect the revenue from somewhere else. So this has to be clear that the targets have to be met. There's no question about that. Not the immediate target, even the interim targets, the short-term targets have to be met to get the country out of this problem. So our principle is this. If you are easing the pressure at the bottom of the pyramid to maintain social stability, we obviously have to take it from somewhere else. There's no question about it. And we don't need to hide it because the cost of social instability could be very, very grave. And we want to make sure that that doesn't really happen, right? And we have seen the world over, countries have suddenly just, gone into flames, right, because of social instability. The most recent case, a couple of months ago was Bangladesh. The economy was growing faster than Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka, the economy was minus, this was growing, but suddenly it all blew over. And one of the reasons, there are many, many different reasons why there's social instability in the country, but one reason is that the gap between the haves and the have-nots had widened quite a lot, in Bangladesh. In Sri Lanka, it's no different, right? There is a real problem because at the bottom, people are under tremendous pressure, right? So therefore, we need to do something. So we will go ahead with protecting the vulnerable and making life easier for those who are going to work. That we will do. So the question you're asking is a valid one. How will you really compensate for that? So to compensate for that, we will do a few things. One thing is we will basically increase withholding tax, right? We will do that. And then the concern here is for senior citizens. There is a concern because some of them have an EPF, ETF, some of them have a pension, some don't have. They only have their savings. They've taken their savings, they put it somewhere and they're living off their savings. And if you increase the withholding tax, then the burden on them is great. So for citizens over 65 years, right, we are going to give them some relief if they're over 65 years. Everybody else will have to basically pay the new withholding tax. So withholding tax is one way, and the collection is easy as well. It will make it efficient, so we will have to do that. Then we will also basically look at other taxes.
Actually, I was about to ask the VAT adjustments. How are you going to charge VAT actually? How it is going to be different from the current rates and all?
Yeah, so in VAT, what we will do is, because we have to look at this carefully, because we need to move the economy into growth as well. So what we will do on VAT is, for example, the simplified VAT, the SVAT was there. The government has said that they want to do away with it. We won't. We are going to continue with SVAT to basically help industries, right, and make it more efficient for them, encourage them. And then what we are going to do is actually the opposite. We will bring the VAT rate down from the current 18 to 15%. We will bring it down. And the reason is we're giving a very, very clear signal there. In terms of production, GDP growth, we are giving a very, very clear signal. We are also giving a very clear signal, right, for exports and so forth and so on. But I'm coming back to your question about the revenue losses and the revenue gains. So some revenue losses will be compensated if the economy is growing. So the other one we will look at is the excise taxes. So whether it's tobacco and alcohol. One is, first principle is we're going to go in for indexation in one way or the other, you see, so that there will be formulas, on this, so that we make sure that we are actually gaining when taxes go, prices go up and taxes are input, rather than just the companies gaining, that the government actually gains and passes on that benefit to the public. So excise taxes, we will look at alcohol and tobacco. We will have to look at that. We will look at the casinos, right? And the casino taxes will also be increased because we need to actually collect it. So some things, obviously, we have to collect. Some things we have to do expenditure on.
So if I ask a supplementary question,
yes, sure,
arising from what you mentioned right now. Now you mentioned about this charge in VAT, taxes from excise and tobacco industry.
Yes.
So excise tax, taxes on tobacco products all remain high at the moment. So if you, tax them further, probably it will reduce consumption and then it will deny you of, revenue opportunities. So, how are you going to address that?
This issue has been debated globally. Generally, these are inelastic and they adjust after a while. And if in the long run, the consumption actually goes down, that's not necessarily a bad thing in the long run, because it reduces your health expenditures as well. Because a lot of health expenditures also related to tobacco and alcohol. So as I said, this is been a global point of discussion. So there are phases in which it happens. Adjustment phases will be there. But normally, what has appeared is that the demand for these things are inelastic. After a while, they basically go back to the same amounts of consumption. In the long run, if it comes down, I think we have achieved even a wider important goal.
So we were talking about taxes, and also for us to be able to increase revenue, to resettle or service our debts, we need wealth creation in the country also. We have to increase the size of GDP. Without that, again, there is no hope. So what are the plans to increase the size of GDP actually?
Yeah, so to actually increase GDP, one of the very critical things is you need investment. And at the moment, if the economy hasn't been growing and you've been eating into your savings, your investment proportions are even lower. It's very, very low. So you need to really get more investment. So direct foreign investment is an absolute necessity. Now, direct foreign investment hasn't come to Sri Lanka for quite some time. And the main reason that DFIs don't come is people lack confidence in the country. Because before you look at a project, you see, or before you look at a particular industry, you always look at the country risk. Investors will look at that. They look at the country rating. The country risk is rated, and they look at the country rating, and therefore they don't come. So what are country risk factors? One factor in country risk is the rule of law. If you are an investor or a foreign investor, you want to make sure that if you have an agreement with government, that agreement will actually be honored in the courts of the country, right? Looking at actually legal principles. And there is a lack of confidence there. Sri Lanka created commercial codes some time ago, but these commercial codes are largely ineffective. People who are coming and investing are not going to wait 16 years, to get a verdict. They want a verdict in 6 months. Otherwise, they don't want to be coming here. So the country risk factor is very, very high. Then they need to have confidence in the government, continuation of policy. You say policy reversals are constantly creating doubts in the minds of people. Why should we come here? We have other options. I mean, even in Asia, when Bangladesh was attracting foreign investment in a big way, now things have changed. Then you look at other countries in the world. You look at Vietnam, in Asia. Most countries in the world, phenomenal amounts of direct foreign investment. Sri Lanka is extremely low. So the confidence factor is one, and the government. And this confidence factor is very, very important, right? Because even when you move reforms, right, people look at who are the people behind the reforms, right? If you have a government which is violating the law, I mean, recently we had a situation where the Supreme Court of the country determined, right, that the constitution of the country was violated because appointments that were made by the president of the country, right, were against the Constitutional Council's recommendations. And that was considered as a violation of the constitution. Then more recently, local elections had to be held and the elections were postponed. And the points I'm making here, obviously we made a political noise about it, but now I'm talking about legal issues because the Supreme Court of the country has determined that was also a violation of the sovereignty of the people. Then a United Nations report was just out, a few days ago, and it says that Sri Lanka has gone more the authoritarian route. So these don't build confidence with investors. They have other choices elsewhere. So that is why I say this confidence factor, it's a soft factor, but it's an important factor. In having confidence is so very, very critical. If I were to give a very, very quick example, right, today we know India is one of the largest, fastest growing economies in the world. Right, its GDP grew 2 years ago at 7%, last year at 7.5%, and I was told that the first quarter this time was nearly 9% GDP growth in India, and South India is really taking over. But if you look back, right, how did it happen? In 1991, right, to 1996, India moved with a lot of reforms. Manmohan Singh was working in Geneva. Manmohan Singh was brought down and then he did some work. He was made finance minister of the country, right, Manmohan Singh, and he went through a lot of reforms backed by the Indian public service. And at one point it says, and this is just an anecdotal story but a very important story to say, he had savings in Geneva and those are foreign currency savings. And when the Indian rupee was depreciated, he had a gain. He declared his savings, he declared his gain, and he made a donation, right, to the public fund, right, and demonstrated it. So I think belief in the people who are doing the reforms is absolutely critical. Because if people think that the people who are actually doing it are not sincere or they are really cheating, then confidence goes. So foreign direct investment is absolutely essential, Kelum. Yes. Without that, we can't really get into the growth phase. There are some low-hanging fruits also. Now, one low-hanging fruit, and I will just say that, is really tourism is a low-hanging fruit. Sri Lanka has been known globally as a tourist destination. But the actual number of tourists coming here is very, very, very small. I remember when I was in office in 2018, we had about 2.3 million tourists at that time, which was about the highest we had had, you see, of tourists coming here. It's very, very low number if you take it as a whole. So you look at the tourism industry. Traditionally, it's a seasonal industry. In November, December, January, February, tourists come in here because it is the winters in the United States and in Europe. So people come here. That's a traditional way. What do they look at? They go and see our history, our ancient cities. They go there. Then they go and look at our wildlife. Then they go for our beaches and the sun. That's traditional tourism. We need to change that. We need to look at tourism as a 365-day industry. And it can be. Why not? Why can't it be? So we have to develop, apart from the traditional tourism, urban tourism, city of Colombo tourism. We need to have the centers for it. We need to have the entertainment for it. We need to have convention centers, to attract these tourists. It's remarkable, when Kelum, I don't know, when you were younger, right? The United States of America was what people looked to. And then the USSR, and the world was in two, if you want, groups, right, that the world was in. Today it's different. Today we are looking at it and we're talking of the rise of Asia. We are talking of China and India. It's a big opportunity for Sri Lanka, big opportunity. You see, the Indian middle class in numbers, Kelum, is equal to Europe, right? So if you want 5 million tourists, right, we can get 2 million tourists from India, 3 million tourists from elsewhere, we can get 5 million tourists. I think we have to have a positive attitude. We have to encourage the industry. We have to be open to foreign investment. Our responsibility as government would be is to regulate, but we have to have a mindset to be open to actually make these changes.
Yes. Now, Mr. Wickramaratne, you mentioned about the need for this policy continuity, policy consistency. That was something like one government comes in, they start implementing some policies, and when those policies start taking roots, the other government comes in and they try to undo it. That has been the practice in our country for a long time. Now, the current government has initiated some steps, as you rightly said, to attract foreign direct investments. They talk about this single window to streamline approvals, and also they enacted this Economic Transformation Act, which will come into effect later. So, will you be continuing with those things, or will you be undoing those things?
Yeah, I must say it very, very clearly that all the positive reforms that have been put in place, we will continue. There is no need for us to reinvent the wheel, and we must continue. So if I go back to my Indian story, right, the Manmohan Singh then became Prime Minister, that was the Congress party in India, and subsequently the BJP came into office, the opposition party came into office. What did the BJP do? They continued the policies and the reforms that the Congress party had brought. That was the secret of India's development. So Kelum raised a very important and valid point. If this country is going to go forward, there has to be continuity of policy. The right policies must definitely continue. And in the Indian case, right, there was a good reason it happened. The good reason it happened in India, they had independent public service. They have permanent secretaries. With our Republican Constitution, we changed things. We also used to have an independent public service. We used to have permanent secretaries. Now what happens? Governments change. What do? We change the secretary, right? And we have made the public service beholden to the politician. So that is the difference between India and Sri Lanka. We have said in our manifesto, when we do constitutional reforms, one of the things we are going to look at is actually making the public service in this country independent. The best brains go into the public service, but after a while they leave because of the way the public service actually works. So it is very, very critical. We will continue all the positive reforms that have brought forward because we want to see the country actually progress and go forward.
Yes, actually, does it mean that you will bring back this concept of permanent secretaries again?
Yes, so we have to do that, but that will require certain constitutional amendments. Yeah. So in the constitutional reform project, we have already stated it, that we are going to certainly look at that because we want to have an independent public service. Yeah. So one day, There was Manmohan Singh was there, his secretary was there, Montek Singh Ahluwalia, and then somebody told Manmohan Singh, the problem is that there is no continuity of policy. You know what Manmohan Singh's reply to that was? He said, "You are right." And he pointed at himself. He's a politician. He said, "I am change." And then he pointed at his secretary, Montek Singh Ahluwalia, and he said, "But this is continuity." Right. That is an anecdotal story, but a strong lesson for us Sri Lankans. We need a public service. We need the best brains. We need it to be properly remunerated, and we need to make sure that it is independent. I'll give you another example, right? Because we lack a proper public service, we lack the concept of planning and plan implementation. We had that concept previously. I remember as a young student talking about people like Gamini Korea, who were in the Ministry of Planning, and then subsequently he went on to the United Nations to hold up a very, very high position, I think in UNCTAD as Secretary General or something. Right? So that concept was there earlier, that's not there. What happens today? Right? You have a president or some powerful figure in the government, and then they think, oh, we want to develop our city, Polonnaruwa, or Hambantota, or Kurunegala, or whatever they look at it. Then what do? They say, we want to put an airport there, or we want to put a port there, or we want to put a highway there, or we want to put a cricket stadium there, or we want to put a convention hall. You know what they do? They write a cabinet paper, they bring it to the cabinet, they get the cabinet to approve it, and then after the Ministry of Finance is figuring out how to fund it, and that's how it gets implemented. Most of these projects haven't had project evaluation. And you know, I come from a banking background, I'm the CEO of the country's National Development Bank. Any project comes to us from any entrepreneur or investor, officials look through it very carefully on project financing. They evaluate the project, they look at the cost benefits of the project, and then they say it can be done, it can't be done, or it has to be amended. Sri Lanka needs a Ministry of Planning and Plan Implementation and Monitoring, which is independent, right? And every project, and particularly I'm talking here about capital expenditure, should go there. If it is approved by there only, the cabinet can approve it. If it's not approved there, the cabinet should not be approving it. So, we have highways, for example, and this is the story I'm saying. We have highways, for example. We knew some of these highways are really white elephants. We are borrowing money and putting it in. We will not have returns for 30, 40 years. You won't do projects like that if you are in the private sector. And we were putting those projects. One incident I can say that my colleague Kabir Hashim was minister, I was deputy minister. A highways project came, we evaluated it, we talked about it, and we decided that we should go ahead with it. What happened? Right? We were told, don't worry about it, we'll do it through another ministry. We were sidelined, and we were actually invited only when the foundation stone was being laid. This is what has happened in this country. This is what we have to change. We must change it. I'm not talking about individuals here. I'm talking about systems changes. This is a systems change. Particularly if it's a capital expenditure, it must be independently evaluated and approved, and only then the cabinet should be approving.
So now basically now you are trying to say that all the past governments since independence are to incur a blame for that, for lack of policy continuity?
Yeah, I would say that I'm really focusing on systems. If you look at it, doing away with planning implementation, right, was a big mistake, because it's a very important professional financial step that needs to be done. So I think that thing should be there. Now that doesn't mean that every project is a failure. That doesn't mean that. There's some projects maybe they were financially viable and they happen and they have produced. Particularly I can say this about irrigation, right, and water, right. I would say generally speaking they have been successful, because Sri Lanka with all its new irrigation projects, from the late 70s to the 90s, right, by the late 90s, Sri Lanka became self-sufficient in rice production. When at independence, we were having only about 36% of our rice production in the country and we imported the rest. So those were success factors. So some of the projects definitely were successful.
So another topic being discussed these days politically is this need to address corruption and frauds. Actually, can the mere political rhetoric address that without, building institutions, without bringing in laws, enacting new laws, and ironing out loopholes that provide for corruption? What is your view?
Yeah, so the legal framework is absolutely important. A year ago, I brought a private member's bill to Parliament that was on making public assets and liabilities, not declaration, making it public, more than a declaration, making it public. And I did this because in 2017, 5 of us got together and we made public our personal assets and liabilities, and it's on the internet. And so I thought everybody should be doing this. If they are politicians or if they are high officials holding high office, but this is a trusteeship. And I'm glad to say this present government, they brought in a new law. It was an anti-corruption law, the new Seerbok law. And when this law was brought, we had a discussion about it. And what I had in the assets and liabilities, right, in my private member's bill, most of it was incorporated. We had about 80 amendments, right? The minister accepted it, government voted for it, we voted for it also. Then more recently, right, that is why in this presidential election you suddenly see the assets of the people who are contesting and has to be made public. Then we have brought in another law, that is the Stolen Assets Recovery Law, STAR. We have already drafted the bill. We brought that bill also into Parliament as a private member's bill. Right? It is in the name of Ranjit Bandara, the Member of Parliament, is brought into Parliament as a private member's bill. But government hasn't still adopted that law. What we will do is, the moment we form a government, right, within months, we will take the same law and we will put it through the process quickly, and we will want to enact that law. Now, what the Stolen Assets Recovery Law does is, if people are actually hiding assets overseas in some way, we can't really get hold of those from here. So this Stolen Assets Recovery Law, and then working with the United Nations program on recovering stolen assets, right? Then we get the cooperation of other agencies in those countries who are dealing with corruption, right? And so that's one of the things we will do. So that law, because we've already drawn on the law, within months we can bring it. Then there's another very important thing, Kelum,
Yes.
that we want to do. We want to do this. And that is, we want to create an independent public prosecutor's office, right? The reason is, if you are in government, your lawyer is the Attorney General's office. But there is a conflict, because today I'm a minister, today I'm an advisor, tomorrow I'm a rogue, I steal and rob, and they have to prosecute me. So it just won't happen. And the other thing is, the AG's department has sole discretion on deciding, even if you have instituted a legal case, whether it can be withdrawn. But if you create an independent public prosecutor, right, then the independent public prosecutor only will decide on the case based on its interactions with the judiciary. So we looked at this. I myself went to Hong Kong twice, looked at their Anti-Corruption Commission and also the independent public prosecutor concept, right? And we want to make sure that in Sri Lanka we do that too. So we are not talking just about an idea, because as I said, one law we have put in place, second law we have already drafted and it's in Parliament, but the independent public prosecutor's office has to be created. That will take time, but it will be done.
Actually, finally, I would like to ask you about some candidates talking about this black economy. A lot of people living outside the tax net. Do we accept that such a vast black economy exists in this country? And what are the plans to, bring them back to the tax net?
Yeah, so what you said, Kelum, is correct. You see, because in the 2017-18 period, in 2.5 years, Kelum, right, we increased the number of tax files from 700,000 to 1.4. Now, people normally won't call that black, it depends how you apply the word black economy, but people who are avoiding taxes, you say, when they should be taking a responsibility to actually pay those taxes. So, We basically designed a program, we had a new Inland Revenue Act, we started to put in technology, a RAMI system in, and then we basically went around, getting information and then asking people to basically pay and increase the tax net. That's one. The second thing is that as an important part of what we are doing is we need to do more digitalization of the country. So we will create a digital public infrastructure. And with the digital public infrastructure, every individual in the country will have a unique identity number, every individual. So if they are going to get into any transaction, the transaction could actually be traced if it's a financial transaction. And then basically following it up that way. So increasing the net and also making it more transparent, and then people will have to pay. There are two sides to it. One is we have to increase the taxes, collect it, reduce the corruption, right? But on the other hand, we have to also make sure that we provide the services to the public. So through the digital public infrastructure platform, payments also, we'll create a payment system, for value can exchange. And then people need their services. If they need a birth certificate, if they need a marriage certificate, if they need a death certificate, if they need a driving license, my heavens, the stories you hear about driving licenses, even worse, the stories you hear about getting a passport today. People go in there and get stuck for 12 hours not being able to get a passport. And I just can't understand that. Because in 2003 and 4, when we put the East Sri Lanka project in, right, for which we created, ICTA, if you remember, ICT agency, right, and I was the first founding chairman of it. We were one of the few countries in the world where you can get a passport in one day, right? But now we have gone back that people are struggling to get a passport. Corruption issues are there, and I'm not even talking about the corruption issues. I'm just talking about the efficiency issues and the way forward. So using information technology, digitization is going to be an important part of actually reducing corruption, providing better services, increasing the revenue net. And in increasing the revenue net, one other thing we will do, again, this is not rocket science, other countries have done this, we are going to create a central revenue authority. So because today most of the revenue of the country comes from inland revenue, from customs, and it comes from excise, right? What we are going to do is we're going to have a central revenue authority. So we are trying to reduce the interaction between the consumer or the citizen and the politician, between the citizen or the consumer and high officials. We want to reduce that interaction because that reduces corruption. That's a global case, and that's why the Central Revenue Authority will also be created. So let's say, Kelum, for your company, you have to get an equipment like this. You have to import it, you go to the bank, you open a letter of credit, and then you are informed that the equipment have arrived at customs. Then you have to go to the customs, and you have to clear it, and you have to interact there, and you have to, there's an HS code for this equipment, and then there may be some discussion, right? And then people come and complain saying, oh, the discussion was not really favorable, and then we had to do things which we were supposed to do. Now that gets eliminated, because when that's come there, they send a message saying this has come to the Central Revenue Authority, the Central Revenue Authority sends a message to you, you pay the Central Revenue Authority, message goes back, goods are cleared. So, not rocket science. These things have been done in other countries to make it more efficient. The center and the focus has to be the citizen and the consumer.
Yes. For you to implement all those things, you have to win the elections first. But the current president himself says that your candidate can't beat the other candidate, Andra Kumar Dissanayake. Do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, I don't think it really deserves an answer, apart from saying that, it's sad that Eran Wickramaratne has already conceded the race.
Thank you very much for coming to the program.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.